Vice Sting. Sometimes bored housewives turn to places like Craigslist just to sell it. And then in every major American city, they walk in the corners. Call girls, go see older men just for money. And some of the swankiest parties in Hollywood have some of the kink. Today's Vice Sting focuses on one of the largest John roundups in America. It originated on the I-35 corridor from Illinois down to the Lone Star State of Texas. Society poses the question of men. Was it worth it getting arrested paying for sex? Was it worth it getting hauled in for a mugshot? And finally, was it worth it being questioned by investigators prior to them calling your wife?
But let us acknowledge for one moment, if you will, that this same closeted society, which refuses to admit that behind closed doors, husbands who pay sex workers are no more than men who are routinely put on the couch by their wives. That these men who are banished to the proverbial doghouse, coupled with the withdrawal of physical intimacy by their wives. That this is a spousal tactic women use to control their men, and that males go along with it in order to placate their wives' need to control them. Now, any society that could acknowledge the manipulation a man faces at the hands of his partner could readily acknowledge that the majority of these men have, with their spouses, a cold and very much so distant relationship. Nothing warm at all. Nothing that you want to write home about. That these men live in relationships where they are damned if they do have sex with their wives and criticize, and damned if they don't have sex with their wives by the public. But what ingredient makes up the majority of these men who are willing to risk it all for one pleasurable moment of ecstasy with a prostitute? Now, in all modern policing vice sting raids, there is one vein that runs constant with these men, and that is they pretty much have the same professional type backgrounds. They carry decent careers. They hold positions of respect within the community that they live with every day, that operates beyond what they do with those women. And finally, a great percentage have children who love them dearly. They might not be loved by their wife, but their children love them. It is these backgrounds that the false saints and prophets of decency in our society use to shame these men for the deed of paying for instant gratification. These prophets of decency never allow these men reasoning to be that his wife never supported him. He can't use that. That their wives never understood them. He can't use that when he pays for sex. That their wives were not sexually or emotionally there for them, and because of this, they went to get that from a prostitute. Men can't use that in society. But can he on the other direction with women? Yes. But all of these things I just named for you, we gladly allow and understand in his wife if she has sex outside of her marriage, poetically called an affair. Society believes her statement that her husband was not there for her emotionally, but if her husband was not there for her emotionally, as she said, right, then why did she seek out a man sexually to fulfill that emotional need? Now, couldn't she simply have had sex at home, as she suggests her husband, once he is arrested for solicitation of a prostitute? Couldn't you have got that at home? You see, when it comes to sexual indiscretions of the fair sex or women, there is no street corner that a woman needs to pull up to in her car in order to pay for sexual favors. She doesn't have to do that. You see, she can simply get that from any willing pull-up men who enjoy sex more than women or other women's husbands whose wives have placed them on the similar couches or the doghouse. Now, for those of you who don't know me, don't get me wrong. This show, nor I, advocate human trafficking or what is known as prostitution. We are just trying to get you to see that rather large elephant in the room others are trying to convince you is merely a figment of your imagination. What do you mean? This doesn't exist. That sort of thing. So it is with this particular episode of Vice Sting that I want you to re-examine the arrest of over 71 men in one prostitution raid. Now, a sting that occurred and covered over many states in 1 month time period. Now I want you to look now for a moment at the faces of these 71 arrested men and tell me what you see. I say if you knew what you were looking for, you would see the same face over and over and over again, instead of a man who simply wanted to pay for sex from a woman he didn't know, to take the risk of losing everything, to take the risk of getting a disease. Now that face, despite his weight, despite his race, despite the career, would be recognizable in any family home. For that man is the lonely middle-aged father who has worked to support his home without thanks. A man who may be losing his hair and who probably holds a position of respect and honor in the community which doesn't carry over as respect in his own home by his own wife. Now, don't get me wrong again. I do realize that there is a fringe element of men among that majority of married fathers that are a danger to the community, the women they buy sex from, and their own health. I also know that it is from this group that those Vice Sting units tries to broad stroke all men who buy what these women are peddling. It's just that all men are nasty. Now, just understand that if you are a man with intentions on buying sexual favors, know that there are stings on any given day of the week in America, from hotels to libraries to peep booths, wherever you want to find it. The same type of stings where deputies arrested 71 men in the country's largest prostitution sting. Now, where on one arrest, officials say Brian Robinson walked his cousin Aaron Crane to a local motel door late one night and after making arrangements with an undercover detective posing as a prostitute. So this happens every day of the week. Now, both Waco residents became two of the 71 men arrested in the McLean County Sheriff's Office largest undercover online prostitution sting so far. So Vice has not only been on the streets, it has now gone cyber. So Robinson, 33, and Crane, 31, were arrested during the 14th National John Suppression Initiative, which occurs once a year. Now Robinson, who fled from officers and was subdued with a stun gun, was arrested on charges of evading. Crane was arrested on a Class B misdemeanor charge of prostitution. Now the effort marks McLennan County's 6th undercover prostitution operation in the past 3 years. The department finished this National John Suppression Initiative with the 5th most arrest among the 37 agencies that participated. So you got everybody from local police, county police, state troopers, the FBI into this one sting that they have every year. Now nationwide, the number was nationwide it was 1,020 arrests, sex buyers as they are referred to. A statement from the lead investigator reads as follows. We are trying to eliminate the demand with these stings. It is kind of like the drug business, because as long as you have people on drugs, which are men, wanting it and paying for it, we are going to have drug dealers, or the women in this case. Now, he said we are trying to diminish this demand, but whether or not we will stop it, that may be impossible. So he knows that's impossible to stop. It's the oldest profession on the planet, ladies and gentlemen. So if we can diminish the demand, it will cut down on human trafficking. End quote. The operation ran from June 28 to July 31st of last year, and it's going to run again this year. So by placing online advertisement to target sex traffickers, several sheriff's officers division cooperated to investigate, arrest, and transport suspects to jail. He continued on by saying, we get people from Dallas, Fort Worth, Cranfields Gap, and Houston, which is one of the largest prostitution areas in this country. He said we get people just stopping through town, and we had one man come in from Tennessee, he said. Agencies also issued more than $1.5 million in fines. More than 7,630 sex buyers have been arrested in the National Suppression Initiative since it started in 2011. So it's been 2011 up to the current year, including this year. Now the sting began in July, and most of the men arrested were from out of town. They were coaches, prison guards, even police officers, and Baylor students were among the 71 men arrested in a prostitution and human trafficking sting. Now, the 1-month sting was in support of the National John Suppression Initiative, which I named before, and it started in Cook County, Illinois. So it runs from Cook County down to Texas. There's a corridor on a highway. So while most of these men are not from Central Texas, the Texans think that the Interstate 35 corridor and Waco's location on the highway plays into what so many Johns came to the area for. So McLennan County is the 5th in the nation for the most prostitutes arrests, McNamara added. So it's amazing. In the South, in the Texas and Houston, the county's #1 prostitution arrests ranked higher than high-profile cities such as New York, who would imagine? Las Vegas, who would imagine? And Boston. The nationwide crackdown on sex trafficking is coordinated by the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois and known as the National John Suppression Initiative. So look out for this even this year. Now in Houston, they had participation from 8 hotel operators cooperated with law enforcement agencies in the operation from June 28th through July 31st of last year. And the similar thing is going on, like I said, this year. Now that involved authorities placing ads in online sites known to attract people interested in buying sex. Now they sat back, the investigators, and waited for the folks to ring the doorbell or the phone. So when the caller said they wanted to meet in person so they could pay for sex, undercover deputies and officials obliged. Now in hotel rooms, 161 sexual predators offered our deputies and officers money for sex. And that when they were arrested, another 88 sex buyers and 9 people identified as sex traffickers were arrested by the Houston police. That's just in the area of Houston itself. Now the sheriff said those arrested were business professionals and suburban Houston church pastors. He said our aim is for Harris County and Houston investigators was to share the dubious distinction as America's trafficking capital. Like I said before, Houston, Texas is the largest place in America that sex is sold on the street and in hotels. So, for Vice Sting, we hope to see you again soon and not behind bars. Thank you for watching.
I will drop everything I have. Let's hit the bus stop. 'Cause I would do sitting on top, ready for